From the very first moment the quiet morning sunlight fell across the wide glass windows of the Hollywood studio, there was already something different in the air, something tense but strangely gentle, like a soft breeze trying to warn of a storm that had not yet shown its face. Sandra Bullock felt it before she even walked into the room. She did not know why. Maybe it was the way her assistant hesitated when handing her the schedule for the day, or the way people whispered in corners as she passed, or the simple fact that her heart had been unsettled since the night before. Or maybe, she thought, it was something much deeper, something she had been avoiding for years, something she had buried inside her chest because she believed that if she pretended not to feel it, it would go away. But emotions do not disappear when ignored. They grow quietly, waiting for a moment when the world slows down long enough to let them rise. Today felt like that kind of day. What she did not know yet was that Keanu Reeves was standing alone in the next room, rehearsing lines he would never read and practicing breaths he could not control. He had spent the whole night awake, walking from the window to the kitchen and back again, unable to calm the steady pressure in his chest. He had carried so many things for so many years, things people never saw, things he did not allow himself to say. But silence had a weight, a heaviness that grew each time he pushed down a feeling that wanted to rise. And now it felt impossible to hold it any longer. He had always been a man who believed in timing, in patience, in letting life open doors at the right moment. But what if the moment never came unless he created it himself? What if the truth could not wait anymore? The first hook of the day came in the form of a simple message delivered by a nervous assistant who kept glancing at the floor instead of meeting Sandra's eyes. "Keanu wants to speak with you before the shoot," he said. "Privately, he said it's important." The words struck her like a wave she hadn't prepared for. It was not unusual for them to talk, and it was not unusual for him to ask for a quiet moment away from the noise of Hollywood. But something in the assistant's voice made her pause. Something about the way he said "important" felt heavier than it should have. She nodded gently, trying to hide her reaction, but inside she felt a sudden twist in her stomach, like the past was trying to return. As she walked down the hallway, each step felt both too slow and too fast. Memories she had not invited flooded her mind. Long conversations with him during old film shoots, shared jokes in trailers, moments when she caught him watching her with a softness that made her heart beat quicker, and moments she wished she had handled differently. But the world had changed since then. Life had brought joy and pain, loss and healing, new connections and broken ones. She had grown, he had grown, and yet something between them had always stayed untouched, like a sealed box neither dared to open. She reached the door. Her hand hovered over the handle for a moment longer than she intended. Then she quietly pushed it open. Keanu was standing near the window, sunlight outlining his figure in a soft glow that made him seem both steady and fragile at the same time. He turned when he heard the door, and for a moment neither of them said anything. They simply looked at each other, and in that silence something inside Sandra shifted. She had always been good at reading people, especially him, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart tighten. He looked nervous. Keanu Reeves, the man who had faced unimaginable storms with composure, looked nervous. "Hey," he said finally, his voice low, almost gentle enough to be carried away by the air. "Hey," she replied, trying to keep her tone light even though she felt the weight of the room pressing against her. He took a slow breath, and she watched the way his hands tightened slightly, as if he was holding something he feared might fall apart. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I know you're busy." She shook her head. "It's okay, you said it was important." Keanu paused. The silence stretched, not uncomfortably, but deeply, like a moment that needed space before it could hold the truth. He walked a little closer, not too close, but close enough for her to feel the quiet force of his presence. She had always found comfort in that presence, though she rarely admitted it even to herself. "I didn't know when to tell you," he began slowly, "or if I should. But I realized something last night. Sometimes you think you have all the time in the world to say things, and then life reminds you that you don't. And I don't want to keep carrying something that involves you without you knowing." Sandra felt her breath catch. She nodded gently for him to continue. Keanu looked down for a brief second, collecting himself, then lifted his eyes again with a mixture of vulnerability and determination that shook her more than any dramatic scene she had ever acted in. "There's something I've been keeping to myself for years," he said quietly. "Something I should have said a long time ago, something that might change how you see things, maybe even how you see me." Her pulse quickened. The room seemed to grow still around them. "What is it, Keanu?" she whispered. Keanu's voice trembled, not enough for most people to notice, but enough for her to feel it. "I've been carrying a secret," he said, "and it's about you." The words hit her like a shock. She tried to stay calm, tried to remain grounded, but curiosity mixed with nerves tightening inside her chest. "About me?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, about you, and about something I felt, something I never said because I thought saying it would complicate everything, and maybe it will, but silence has its own consequences." She felt the walls inside her shift, old memories pushing forward with sudden force. She remembered conversations they had during speed, moments when their eyes held too long, the quiet understanding between them that no one else seemed to notice. She remembered interviews where reporters teased them about chemistry, and they laughed it off even though something deeper flickered beneath the surface. And she remembered all the times she wondered, privately, if he had ever felt what she felt but never admitted. But she did not let those thoughts show. She kept her expression steady, encouraging him gently. "Keanu, whatever it is, you can tell me." He looked away, then back at her, as if fighting with himself. "I didn't want to say it because I didn't want to lose the friendship we had, and I didn't want you to feel responsible for something you never asked for. I didn't want it to affect your life, but it has affected mine, every single year since the day we met." Her breath hitched. Keanu exhaled shakily. "The truth is, I cared about you more deeply than I allowed myself to admit, and I never told you. I never told anyone. I kept it inside because I thought it was the right thing to do, but holding it in changed me. It shaped the way I looked at relationships, the way I trusted people, the way I protected myself. You were the person who made me realize how much I could feel, and I never told you." The confession hung in the air like a fragile crystal, shimmering with honesty and pain. Sandra felt her throat tighten, her eyes burning with emotion she did not expect to feel so strongly. She had wondered once years ago if he felt something more, but she never believed he kept something like this hidden for so long. She wanted to speak, but her voice refused to come out immediately. She stared at him, stunned, moved, confused, and overwhelmed all at once. Keanu continued, his voice softer but steadier now that the words had finally escaped. "I didn't tell you because your life was full of its own challenges. You were finding your joy, your balance, your peace. I didn't want to add pressure. I didn't want to create a burden. I respected you too much to risk hurting you or confusing you. But recently, I realized something. Being honest is sometimes the only way to heal what silence has broken. And I don't want to walk through the rest of my life knowing I never gave you the truth." Sandra's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. She finally managed a breath, then another. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Keanu, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," he said quickly, gently. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just needed you to know. I needed the truth to exist outside my head. You deserve that, and maybe I deserve a little honesty too." She stepped closer without realizing it. She was standing only a few feet from him now, and she could see the unspoken pain in his eyes, the years of holding too much alone, the quiet strength he always carried even when he felt most fragile. She wanted to comfort him, to say something that would ease the weight he had released, but her voice shook with emotion. "Keanu, why now?" He looked at her with tired honesty. "Because sometimes you realize that life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It pushes you. It forces you to face what you've been avoiding. And last night, something happened that made me realize I can't keep pretending the past didn't shape me, and you were a big part of that past." Her breath caught again. "What happened last night?" Keanu opened his mouth to answer. But then the door burst open. Both of them turned sharply. Her assistant stood in the doorway, pale, trembling, eyes full of shock. "Sandra, Keanu, there's something you need to see," he stammered. "It's urgent, really urgent." Keanu frowned. "What is it?" The assistant swallowed hard, looking between them with fear that made Sandra's skin crawl. It's about someone from your past," he whispered. "Someone who just came forward, and they claim they know the truth you didn't expect anyone to know." Sandra felt the room spin. Keanu's expression changed instantly, his eyes darkening with concern. "What truth?" he demanded softly, but with unmistakable intensity. The assistant stepped back, voice trembling. "It's big and it's spreading fast, and it involves both of you." Sandra's heart dropped as the world seemed to shift under her feet. She looked at Keanu. He looked at her, and she whispered, barely breathing. "What did they say?" The assistant's voice cracked. "They said They know the secret Keanu didn't want the world to find out. Keanu froze. Sandra's pulse raced. The assistant hesitated, then added, "And they said there's proof." The room went silent. The air thickened. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm without thinking. Keanu whispered, his voice shaking for the first time. "This is something I wasn't prepared for." And before either of them could speak again, the assistant handed Sandra a phone. On the screen was a name she thought she would never see again. A name tied to a memory even Keanu didn't know about. Her eyes widened. Her breath left her chest. And the screen began to load the moment the name flashed on the phone's screen. Sandra felt her entire body tighten, as if every memory she had locked away was suddenly pressing against the surface of her mind, begging to be seen again. She had spent years protecting herself from that chapter of her life, convincing herself that she had moved on, that she had healed, that she had grown strong enough to never let it affect her again. But now, standing in that quiet room with Keanu watching her with deep concern, she realized that some memories don't stay buried. They wait, patient and sharp, ready to rise when the world is least prepared for them. The phone vibrated again, and Sandra's breath trembled as she stared at the name on the screen. Keanu moved closer, sensing her fear immediately, his voice soft but firm as he asked, "Sandra, who is that?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She felt her heartbeat pounding heavily in her ears, drowning out the sounds of the room. Keanu's presence was steady beside her, the kind of quiet strength she had always trusted, but at that moment she felt too overwhelmed to pull herself together. She looked at the assistant, who was still standing in the doorway, waiting nervously as if he expected the room to break apart at any moment. Why would this person contact me now?" Sandra finally whispered, her voice barely a thread. "After all these years, why now?" Keanu kept his gaze on her, studying her expressions carefully, trying to understand the weight behind her fear. "Sandra, do you want to tell me who they are?" She hesitated, and the hesitation itself told him more than words ever could. His expression softened, his voice lowering into something that felt almost like a promise. "You don't have to tell me everything, not if you're not ready, but you're not alone, not right now." His gentleness nearly broke her. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling breath. "It's someone who knew me when I was who I am now," she murmured. "Someone who knew things I never wanted the world to know." The assistant took a few steps inside, carefully placing the phone on the table before stepping back, as if he didn't want to get too close to a moment he could tell wasn't meant for outsiders. "There's more," he said in a shaky voice. "They didn't just contact you, they posted something, and people are already talking about it. They're claiming it's related to both of you." The room grew colder. Keanu's jaw tightened just slightly. Not in anger, but in a kind of protective instinct Sandra had seen only a handful of times over the years. He picked up the phone, his fingers brushing against the screen as he opened the message. Sandra tried to look away, but the tension in her chest pulled her eyes back toward the device. The message was short, but terrifying enough to send another wave of fear through her. "You can't hide forever. The truth always comes out." There was also an attachment, an old photograph that Sandra did not recognize immediately, but as she stared, her stomach dropped. It was from nearly 20 years ago, long before she became the version of herself she was proud of. It was from a time when she was still navigating pain she didn't know how to heal, still searching for identity, still surrounded by people who did not always have her best interests in mind. But the worst part wasn't the photo. It was the caption. "Ask Keanu why he never told you what really happened." Her breath caught. Keanu froze. Sandra stepped backward instinctively, like the truth itself was too heavy to stand close to. Keanu reached out as if to steady her, but stopped, giving her space, respecting her boundaries even in a moment that could have easily overwhelmed them both. "Sandra," he whispered, "whatever they think they know, I need you to understand something. I have never, not once, kept anything harmful from you. I never would." She believed him, instinctively, deeply, without question. But the fear she felt wasn't about whether he lied. It was about the possibility that someone from her past had twisted something she didn't even remember clearly. The assistant broke the silence hesitantly. "There's more. They posted a video too. It's gaining views fast." Keanu looked at Sandra with a silent question. "Are you ready to see this?" She was, not even close, but avoiding it wouldn't make it disappear. "Play it," she said softly. Keanu tapped the screen and the video loaded. The face that appeared was older than she remembered, worn by bitterness or regret. She couldn't tell which. The person spoke with a sharpness that made Sandra's skin crawl. "I stayed quiet all these years," the person said, "but everyone needs to know the truth. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, they built their careers on lies. They built their friendship on something they hid from the world. And I have proof of what they tried to bury." Sandra felt her knees weaken. Keanu stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, grounding her. "This is not true," she whispered. "This person, they're twisting something." Keanu didn't look away from the screen. "What are they talking about? What is this about?" Sandra closed her eyes, fighting against the rising panic that threatened to spill out of her. "There was a time in my life," she said slowly, "when I was surrounded by people I trusted for all the wrong reasons. I didn't know better. I was hurting and I let people in who shouldn't have been there. I thought those years were behind me." Keanu's voice was gentle. "Did something happen that I didn't know about?" Her silence answered him. The video continued, the person speaking directly into the camera. "And for anyone who doubts me," they said coldly, "I have recordings, messages, proof that Keanu Reeves wasn't the man people think he is, and proof that Sandra Bullock has been hiding something that the world deserves to know." Keanu's expression darkened, not with anger, but with a fierce kind of protectiveness Sandra had rarely seen. He ended the video before it could continue. "This person is lying," he said firmly, "or twisting something, but they want attention, they want drama, they want to break something important." Sandra wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep her emotions steady. "I don't understand why this is happening now," she whispered. "Why after so many years? Why bring Keanu into this? What do they want from me?" "They want a reaction," Keanu said softly. "They want control. They want to use the past to hurt the present." She nodded, feeling a painful truth inside his words. And yet the fear remained. There was something deeper behind the message, something personal, something that made her feel exposed in a way she had not felt in decades. "There's more," the assistant said, swallowing hard. "People are starting to ask questions online. Some think it's about an old relationship. Some think it's about a scandal. Some think it's about a hidden message Keanu left years ago." Keanu let out a slow breath. "A hidden message." The assistant nodded. "There's a rumor going around that you two shared something private during one of your old films, something the public never knew about, and people think this person is going to reveal it." Sandra felt her heart race. She looked at Keanu, and he looked back with an expression she couldn't read fully, part confusion, part reflection, part something more complex. "We didn't share anything like that," Keanu said gently, though even he seemed unsure whether he remembered every detail of those old days. Sandra wasn't sure either, not because anything inappropriate happened, but because those years were filled with complicated emotions. Quiet ones, buried ones, ones neither of them ever dared to describe. "Maybe they're inventing a story," Sandra whispered. "People do that." "Or," Keanu said softly, "maybe someone misunderstood something from the past. Maybe they saw something and created their own version of it." The assistant stepped closer. "Should I prepare a statement? Something for the media? People are asking for your response." Keanu shook his head gently. "No, not yet. Reacting too fast makes things worse." Sandra nodded. "I agree." But even as she said the words, her mind churned with fear. There was a memory she had pushed away for years, a night on set when she was overwhelmed, vulnerable, unsure of how to face the pressure she was under. She remembered Keanu being there, offering comfort. She remembered crying in a quiet corner where no one else saw, and she remembered someone else walking past them, someone she didn't trust, someone who had held too much power over her at the time. Was that moment what this person was twisting? She felt a shiver run through her. Keanu seemed to sense the shift in her energy. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sandra, if there's something you're remembering, something that person could use against you, you can tell me, whatever it is." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears she tried desperately to hold back. "Keanu, there are things from my past I've never told anyone, not because I was hiding them, but because they hurt too much, and I never wanted them to define me." "They don't define you," he said immediately. "Nothing from your past can take away who you are now." Her throat tightened. "But if the world sees it, if they twist it, if they drag you into it, I don't know if I can handle that." Keanu's gaze softened. You don't have to face it alone. Before she could respond, the assistant's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His eyes widened. His voice broke. There's a second video. Sandra's stomach dropped. From the same person? Keanu asked. The assistant nodded shakily. Yes, and this one mentions Keanu by name. Keanu stepped forward. Play it. The assistant handed him the phone. The video loaded. The person stared into the camera with cold satisfaction. I'm not done, they said. If Sandra doesn't tell the truth, I will. And Keanu, you should stop pretending you had no part in this. Because you and I both know what was said that night, and if I have to remind the world, I will. Keanu's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a deep, calm seriousness that frightened Sandra more than any outburst could. What night? He murmured to himself. Keanu, Sandra whispered, stepping closer, is there something you remember? He shook his head slowly, his voice barely audible. I don't know, maybe. There were nights during those years, nights you were hurting, nights I tried to help. Maybe someone overheard something, maybe they twisted it. Sandra grabbed his hand instinctively, her fear rising again. Keanu, what if they reveal something we can't control, something that people will believe even if it's not true? He looked down at their hands intertwined, then back into her terrified eyes. Then we stay steady, he said gently, together. Her breath trembled. But before she could say anything, the assistant spoke again, his voice filled with dread. There's more, he whispered. The person, they announced they will release the so-called proof tonight, and they tagged both of you. Sandra's heart dropped. Keanu's expression hardened, not in anger but in resolve. The assistant looked between them helplessly. What do we do? Keanu inhaled slowly, then exhaled, grounding himself. First, he said softly, we talk, privately, without cameras, without assistants, without the world watching. We find out exactly what they think they have. Sandra nodded slowly. But inside, something else had shifted. A memory. A sharp one. It hit her like lightning. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened with fear Keanu had never seen in her before. Sandra, he whispered, stepping toward her. What is it? Her voice shook uncontrollably. Keanu, I think I know what they're talking about. Keanu froze. The assistant stared. Her chest tightened painfully. And if I'm right, she whispered, tears forming as the realization sank in. Then things are about to get much worse than we thought. The fear on Sandra's face did something to Keanu that he could not quite explain. It was not the kind of fear she showed in movies or interviews, the kind she could manage with grace and composure. This was different. This was raw, real, sharp, and rooted in a place he had never been allowed to reach. It was the kind of fear that came from a memory so painful she had buried it deep enough to forget, or at least to pretend it never happened. And the moment he saw that fear rise in her eyes, he knew that whatever was happening now was not just a random attack from someone seeking attention. It was connected to something she had carried quietly for years, something she never meant to surface again. He stepped closer, steady but cautious, not wanting to overwhelm her. Sandra, he said softly, whatever you're remembering, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone. Her breath shook as she lifted a trembling hand to her forehead, pressing her fingers against her temple as if trying to stop the memory from pushing through. Keanu, I haven't thought about that night in so long. I didn't want to. I tried so hard to forget. But now I think that person knows exactly what they're doing. They waited for the right moment. They waited for me to be vulnerable, and they waited for you to be pulled into it. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, grounding her with quiet calmness. Tell me what you remember. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the closed door as if afraid the walls might be listening. Not here, she whispered. Too many people, too much noise. I need somewhere quiet. Keanu nodded. My place is nearby, nobody there, nobody to overhear anything. We can go now. She nodded weakly, relief mixing with anxiety. Okay. Within minutes, they slipped out a back exit of the studio, avoiding the spots where cameras could be waiting. Sandra kept her sunglasses on even though the sun was beginning to lower, and the shadows of the city stretched long across the pavement. Keanu walked beside her, close enough to protect, far enough to respect her need for space. The assistant stayed behind to monitor online activity and inform them of any new updates. As they reached the parking lot, Sandra felt her hands shaking and tried to hide it by holding her bag tighter, but Keanu noticed anyway. He opened the door for her without a word, watching her carefully as she stepped inside. Once the engine started, the car filled with a strange silence, tense, thick, but also strangely comforting. The hum of the road beneath them became the only steady sound as the city moved around them, unaware of the storm unfolding inside the quiet interior of the car. Keanu glanced at her occasionally, not pushing her to speak, letting her breathe, letting her think. He knew Sandra well enough to understand that she needed to form the words in her mind before she could release them into the world. And when she finally exhaled deeply, he could feel the moment she found the courage to begin. "It was years ago," she said softly. "Long before people knew me the way they do now. I was still learning who I was, still figuring out how to survive in an industry that didn't always give second chances. There were people around me who said they wanted to help, but looking back now, I think they only stayed close because they knew I was vulnerable." Keanu listened intently, his eyes steady on the road but his attention fully on her. "There was a night," Sandra continued, "when everything felt like it was crashing down. I was overwhelmed by pressure. It felt like every mistake I made was being magnified. I didn't know how to handle the attention. I didn't know how to handle the expectations, and I didn't know how to handle the loneliness." Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. "That night I left a group gathering early. I didn't want to be around people anymore. I found a quiet place behind one of the sound stages where nobody usually went. I thought I could breathe there. I thought I could pull myself together." Keanu's voice was soft when he asked, "Was I there?" She nodded slowly. "You came looking for me. I didn't expect you to. I didn't tell you I was leaving. I didn't even think you noticed. But you found me sitting alone and you sat beside me without asking questions. You didn't pressure me to talk. You just stayed." Keanu felt something shift quietly inside his chest. "You said something that night," Sandra added softly. "Something I didn't fully understand at the time. Something gentle. Something about how people don't need to be perfect to be worthy of kindness. And I remember crying because I didn't think I deserved kindness then." She paused, her eyes distant. "Someone saw us, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who had reasons to twist things. Someone who had power over me because they knew parts of my past that I worked hard to outgrow, and they used it. They used that moment to manipulate me. They told me you said things you never actually said. They told me you cared more than you should. They told me I owed them something because they could destroy both of us." Keanu's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel, his jaw tightening with controlled emotion. "Who was it?" She shook her head. "I don't want to say their name yet, not until I'm sure it's the same person contacting us now, but they had a history of twisting things, of using people's pain to control them. And that night, they tried to use you against me." Keanu took a slow breath, steady and calm. "But I never said anything hurtful. I never did anything to hurt you." "I know," she whispered. "I know that now, but at the time I was so lost. I believed things I shouldn't have, and instead of asking you for the truth, I distanced myself. I convinced myself it was safer to close that part of my heart." The weight of those words settled between them. Keanu drove a little slower, as if the road itself needed to match the heaviness of the conversation. "I wish you had told me," he said quietly. "I would have protected you from them." "I know," she whispered again, voice trembling. "But I didn't want you to get hurt because of my mistakes." They fell into another deep silence, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of truth, unspoken, unfinished, waiting. When they reached Keanu's home, the calmness of the place brought a small sense of relief to Sandra. The space was warm, quiet, filled with plants and soft lighting, a peaceful contrast to the storm she carried inside. Keanu motioned for her to sit wherever she felt comfortable, but she remained standing for a moment, her hands gripping the back of a chair as if she needed support. "I think that person saw something they didn't understand," she said finally. "And they decided to use it, maybe out of jealousy, maybe out of bitterness, maybe because they thought it would give them power. And now, all these years later, they still think they can manipulate the story." Keanu nodded slowly. "But what exactly do they think they have? What proof do they claim to hold?" Sandra closed her eyes tight as if trying to force a memory into focus. "I remember a voice. A conversation, not mine, not yours, someone speaking behind the stage, someone saying they had a recording. I don't know if they actually had one or if it was a lie to scare me. But they said something like, if people knew what Keanu told you that night, your careers would crumble." Keanu frowned, but I didn't say anything that could harm either of us. I know, she insisted. But they twisted it. They said they heard you say something emotional, something honest, something they claimed was dangerous, but I think it was their way of trying to control me, to keep me quiet, to keep me afraid. Keanu exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead as he thought. Maybe they didn't have anything back then, but now with how technology works, maybe they created something, a fake, an edited clip, something to make it look real. Sandra's breath caught. You think they could do that? People do worse, he said gently, especially when they want attention. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I just don't want you dragged into something because of me. He sat across from her, his voice calm but unshakable. I'm not being dragged into something. I'm choosing to stand with you. Her eyes glistened as she looked up at him. Keanu, you don't have to. I want to, he said before she could finish. You've carried things alone for too long. Let me help you carry this. The silence that followed was heavy but healing. After a moment, Sandra reached for her bag and pulled out her phone. The assistant said the person was going to release the proof tonight, she whispered. What if? What if we should see it before the world does? What if knowing what we're up against helps us breathe again? Keanu nodded. Let's call him, ask if there are updates. She dialed quickly, her hands shaking slightly, and the assistant answered almost immediately. Sandra, he said breathlessly, thank God you called. I was about to contact you both. What happened? She asked, heart racing. The assistant hesitated. The second video started trending, he said. People are talking, they're speculating, they're building stories around the past, and the person just posted a countdown. A countdown to what? Keanu asked sharply. To the proof, the assistant replied. They said the release will happen in 3 hours, and Sandra, Keanu. Their voices tightened. What did they say? Sandra whispered. The assistant swallowed hard. They posted a message saying, tonight, the truth they hid will finally come out, the truth that ended their connection all those years ago. Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu leaned forward. But that's not all, the assistant said, voice trembling now. They added another line. Sandra held her breath. Keanu's pulse quickened. The assistant exhaled shakily. They said, and the world will finally understand why Sandra Bullock walked away from him. The room fell silent. Sandra's heart dropped into her stomach. Keanu stared at her. And Sandra, trembling, whispered the words that broke the air in half. Keanu, I think they know the one thing I never told you, the truth Sandra never said aloud. The moment Sandra whispered those words, a heavy stillness filled the room, the kind of silence that carried more weight than any spoken confession. Keanu felt the air tighten around them, as if the world itself paused to listen, to sense what was coming, to prepare for a truth that had waited far too long to surface. He watched her closely, noticing the tremble in her hands, the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes darted away from his as if she feared the pain her own truth could cause. He had seen Sandra face heartbreaks, career pressure, personal storms, and unimaginable losses, but he had never seen her look this fragile. Whatever she was about to reveal was not small. It was something she had locked inside a part of her heart that no interview, no performance, no friend had ever entered. He spoke gently, almost afraid to push her too fast. Sandra, whatever you think they know, whatever you think you never told me, you can say it. I'm not going anywhere. She took a long, shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the chair as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Keanu, this is something I should have told you years ago, but I didn't, and because I didn't, I think someone else twisted the story, and now it looks worse than it ever was. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his expression full of concern and something deeper, something protective, patient, quietly strong. Tell me, he said softly. She shook her head at first, her throat tightening as the memory clawed its way back. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared of how you'll see me after this, scared you'll think I should have trusted you more, scared you'll think I was weak. Keanu softened, his voice barely above a whisper. I could never see you as weak, never, and nothing you say will change the respect I have for you. Her eyes glistened with tears. She tried to blink away. But it will change something, she murmured. Because the truth is connected to you, and connected to why I pulled away from you years ago, not because I wanted to, but because I thought I had to. Keanu felt a subtle ache in his chest. He had always wondered why she suddenly became distant after they wrapped filming years ago. He never demanded answers, never pushed. He simply accepted her space, respecting her boundaries. But the distance never matched the warmth they once shared. Now he understood that something deeper lay behind it. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as the words formed slowly. "Remember that night behind the sound stage, when you found me crying alone?" Keanu nodded, "Yes." "After you left," she said, closing her eyes as the memory replayed in her mind, "someone approached me. Someone who knew things about my past I wasn't ready to face. Someone who used those things against me." Keanu's expression darkened slightly, not with anger, but with a quiet, steady fury reserved for people who hurt others without remorse. "Who was it?" he asked. "Someone who used to be close to me," she whispered. "Someone who pretended to support me. Someone who had power over my choices and who knew I was insecure back then." Keanu exhaled slowly, letting her continue. "They claimed they overheard our conversation," she said. "They said you confessed something to me that night, something that could hurt you if it ever got out." Keanu frowned, "But I didn't confess anything." She nodded painfully. "I know, but back then I was confused, I was overwhelmed, and they twisted your kindness into something else. They said you opened up to me, that you told me something you weren't supposed to share, that if I wasn't careful, people would think we were hiding something." Keanu shook his head. "That never happened." "I know," she said again. "But I was scared. I let fear take over. I let them convince me that staying close to you could hurt your image, that your fans would misunderstand, that the media would twist it, and I couldn't let that happen to you, so I pulled away." Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, but not with anger toward her, only toward the person who had manipulated the situation. "You should have told me," he said gently. "I would have helped you." "I know," she whispered. "But I was young, afraid, and I already had a history of trusting the wrong people. I thought keeping distance was the right thing. I thought protecting you meant leaving." Her voice cracked. "And now," she continued, "that same person or someone connected to them is using that night to tear us apart again. They're claiming they know what happened. They're claiming you said something you didn't, and they're claiming I hid something that never existed." Keanu leaned back slowly, processing the tangled truth. "So the secret they think they have is a twisted version of that night." She nodded. "Yes, but it's worse, because there's something else, something I never told you, something from before that night." Her hands trembled. Keanu moved to sit beside her, not touching at first, just offering presence. "Tell me," he said softly. She inhaled shakily. "Before that night, before we had that quiet moment behind the stage, I had been dealing with someone who tried to control parts of my life. Someone who made me believe I wasn't worthy of good people. They convinced me that if anyone saw the real me, my fear, my past mistakes, my insecurities, they would walk away. They would think I was broken." Keanu's voice was firm. "You were never broken." She closed her eyes, tears threatening to spill. "I know that now, but back then I didn't. And you," she looked up at him with a fragile softness, "you were the one person who made me feel safe without asking anything in return, and that scared me more than anything." Keanu's heart tightened. "Why would that scare you?" "Because kindness felt like a trap to me back then," she admitted. "Love, care, they were used against me by people who didn't mean it. So when you showed genuine kindness, I didn't know what to do with it. I thought I was reading too much into it. I thought I wasn't good enough for that honesty." She wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "So when that person told me you said something emotional that night, I believed them, and I thought, if I stayed close, I might hurt you without meaning to." Keanu gently placed a hand over hers. She flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the sudden comfort. He kept his touch soft. "You didn't hurt me, not then, not now." A single tear slid down her cheek. "I walked away," she whispered, "and I never told you why. I just disappeared, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He didn't move away, didn't let go. Instead, he spoke with a softness that carried years of unspoken understanding. "I always wondered why, but I never blamed you. I thought maybe life just took us in different directions. But hearing this, Sandra, you should have never carried that alone." She looked at him with trembling eyes. "I was afraid you'd see me differently." He shook his head. "The only thing I see is someone who survived things she never deserved, someone who fought her way to strength, someone who still shows kindness despite being hurt. Nothing you say changes that. Her breath shivered as she whispered, "But the world is going to twist it. They're going to twist everything." Keanu's expression softened. "We'll face it together." Before she could process the comfort in his voice, her phone buzzed violently on the table, making both of them jump. Keanu reached for it, but Sandra grabbed it first, her hands trembling. A message. From the same account. Her eyes widened. Keanu leaned closer. "What does it say?" he asked. She swallowed hard and read aloud. "The truth will be live in 1 hour, and when people hear what Keanu told you that night, everything will change." Keanu shook his head, "But I didn't say anything that night except..." And then he stopped. Sandra looked at him sharply. "Except what?" He froze. A memory flickered faintly in his mind. The corner behind the sound stage. Sandra crying. Him sitting beside her. He hadn't spoken much, but he had said one thing. One thing he never meant anyone else to hear. One thing he never remembered clearly, because he thought it stayed between them. Sandra stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "Keanu, what did you say?" He opened his mouth to speak. But before he could answer, her assistant called again. She put the phone on speaker. His voice came out in a frantic rush. "Sandra, Keanu, there's a leak. Someone just uploaded a short audio preview of the so-called proof. It's spreading fast." Keanu and Sandra locked eyes. The assistant continued, breathless. "And people are saying, the voice in the recording sounds like Keanu." Sandra's breath caught painfully. Keanu's eyes widened. The assistant added shakily, "And the preview cuts off right after a sentence that says, 'I care about you more than I should.'" Sandra covered her mouth. Keanu froze, and the assistant finished with trembling dread. "The world thinks that's what Keanu confessed to you that night, when the world believed the wrong truth." The sound of the assistant's trembling voice seemed to echo through the entire room, bouncing off the quiet walls and sinking deep into the spaces between Sandra's breaths. She felt the world tilt, everything inside her tightening into a single, painful knot. The words he had said, those 6 words, hit her like a force she could not brace for. "I care about you more than I should." Those words did not belong to the world. They belonged to a moment so private she had forgotten it existed until now. They belonged to a younger version of herself, a version who was fragile and overwhelmed and lost in a storm she didn't know how to escape. They belonged to a version of Keanu who was trying to comfort her, who sat beside her with gentle patience, who spoke from a place he never expected anyone to judge. And now the whole world believed that was a confession, a scandal, a secret, something dramatic, something romantic, something that should have never left the shadows of that quiet place behind the sound stage. Sandra lowered the phone slowly, her hands trembling, her heart racing as if it wanted to escape her chest. She tried to speak, to form a sentence, but her breath caught halfway. It felt like the ground beneath her had cracked open, and she was falling into a truth she had buried so deeply she barely recognized it. Keanu sat perfectly still, his expression calm but unreadable, as though he was working through the revelation in slow, steady pieces. He didn't panic. He didn't jump to conclusions. He didn't immediately defend himself. He simply breathed, letting the information settle, letting the storm inside him find shape. Finally he spoke, his voice low and careful. "Sandra, I think I did say that." She looked up at him sharply, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "You did." He nodded slowly, his gaze steady and honest. "I didn't remember it at first, but now that I hear the words again, it's coming back. That night you were crying, you were hurt, you felt alone, and I wanted you to know that you mattered, that your pain mattered, that you weren't invisible to me." Sandra felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time the emotion was more complicated, part sadness, part relief, part something deeper she didn't know how to name. "But that wasn't a confession," she whispered. "That wasn't romantic. That wasn't anything like what they're making it look like." Keanu nodded again. "I know it wasn't a confession, it was empathy, it was truth, a human truth. I cared about you because you deserved care, because you were hurting, because I didn't want you to feel alone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But it wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a betrayal, it wasn't anything the world should twist." Sandra closed her eyes, remembering that night more clearly now, the way she had tried to hide her face, the way he sat with her without forcing her to speak, the way he respected her silence, the way he offered comfort in the simplest, purest form. "I remember hearing you say something like that," she whispered. "I thought I imagined it. I thought it was my mind trying to create warmth that wasn't there. But you really said it." "Yes," he said softly. "But I didn't think anyone else heard. I didn't even think you heard it clearly. It was quiet. It wasn't meant for anyone else." She swallowed hard. "So this person, whoever they are, they recorded it." Keanu shook his head. "Or they recreated it." She looked at him with confusion. "Recreated?" "Yes," he said. "The audio they posted didn't play the whole sentence. It didn't show context. It didn't show the moment. It only played the most sensitive part, the part that can be twisted." He leaned back slightly, thinking aloud. "They either edited it or they used old audio from somewhere else, maybe an interview, maybe a recording from a set, maybe something I said in a different context." Sandra leaned forward, her voice trembling. "But if there's a real recording, then—" Keanu finished her sentence quietly. "Then someone was listening, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who took a private moment and held on to it for years." The room fell silent again. Sandra felt her chest tighten as guilt washed through her. "Keanu, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I told you someone saw us that night, someone who used it to scare me, and now they're using it again." He gently shook his head. "This isn't your fault. It never was. You were vulnerable. Someone took advantage of that. The blame is on them, not you." But his reassurance did little to soothe the storm inside her. She stood up, pacing the room in slow, shaky steps. "If the world hears that clip, if they think you confessed something to me, they'll build a whole story around it. They'll drag you into a narrative you never chose. They'll say we hid something for years. They'll say I betrayed someone. They'll say you did something wrong." Keanu watched her with calm patience. "They'll say whatever makes the story dramatic," he said quietly, "but that doesn't mean it's true." Sandra stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes full of sadness. "But people believe what they want to believe, and the internet will make it bigger than it is." Keanu offered a soft, reassuring smile. "I can handle people talking. I've survived worse storms." She shook her head. "Not like this, Keanu. This is different. This is personal. This is about something you said in kindness being twisted into something scandalous." He stood slowly, walking toward her with steady steps. "Sandra," he said in a gentle, grounding tone, "I don't regret saying those words. Not then, not now. I cared. I still care. And I won't let someone else weaponize that." A tear escaped her eye before she could stop it. Keanu wiped it away with the lightest touch, not overstepping, not forcing intimacy, just offering comfort. Then her phone buzzed again. Both of them froze. The assistant's voice returned through the speaker as Sandra answered, panic clear in his tone. "Sandra, Keanu, the preview is spreading everywhere. People are already forming theories. Some think you two hid a relationship. Some think there was a breakup. Some think there was a betrayal. It's getting out of control." Sandra's heart pounded. "How long until the full release?" The assistant hesitated. "Less than 40 minutes. Keanu's face remained calm, but Sandra could see the tension in his jaw. "We need the rest of the clip," Keanu said firmly. "We need to hear the full audio before the world does." "I'm trying," the assistant said, "but the account is anonymous. The video is scheduled to auto-release. I can't stop it." Sandra's voice cracked. "Then we need to prepare. We need to." But suddenly, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the assistant. It was a new message. From the same anonymous account. Keanu stepped closer. Sandra opened it with trembling fingers. The message was short. Too short. "I'm not lying, you know what happened, and so does he." Sandra felt her knees weaken. Keanu's brows pulled together, concern forming across his face. "What does that mean? What are they trying to say?" Sandra inhaled shakily, her lungs aching as the truth clawed its way to the surface. "Keanu," she whispered, "there's something else from that night, something I never told anyone, something that person might know because they followed me." Keanu stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "What did they see?" Her eyes filled with tears. Her hands trembled, and her voice broke like fragile glass. "Keanu, after you left me that night, I broke down again. I said something out loud, something emotional, something desperate, something I regret, and I didn't know anyone was listening." Keanu froze. Sandra continued, her voice barely audible. I said, I wish I could feel safe with him the way I do now. I wish I could tell him the truth. The room went silent. The meaning of her words hung between them, raw, exposed, impossible to take back. Keanu stared at her, his chest rising slowly, his breath unsteady. Sandra, he whispered, stunned. But before he could say anything more, her assistant's voice shouted through the phone, panicked and breathless. The full audio leak just started early. Sandra gasped. Keanu tensed, and the assistant cried out. Sandra, Keanu, there's more than one sentence. The recording is longer, much longer. Their hearts raced. He continued, voice shaking uncontrollably. And it's not just Keanu's voice. There's a second voice in the background. Sandra's blood ran cold. And the assistant stammered, and I think that second voice is you, when the truth finally spoke for itself. The moment the assistant's voice burst through the phone announcing the early leak, Sandra felt every muscle in her body tense as if she'd been thrown into freezing water. Her breath came sharply, her hands shook uncontrollably, and her mind raced faster than she could gather her thoughts. Across from her, Keanu's expression changed in an instant, calm but fiercely focused, like someone preparing to walk directly into a storm without flinching. The assistant's words kept echoing, a second voice, her voice, the world hearing something she never intended anyone to hear. Sandra's heart struck her chest painfully, each beat heavy with dread. The idea that a private moment from a painful part of her life was about to become a public spectacle felt unbearable. Worse than that, it was more than a fear of being exposed. It was the fear of losing control over a truth she had been trying to protect for years. A truth she wasn't ready to face. A truth she definitely wasn't ready for the world to hear. Keanu stepped toward her, his voice steady but low with concern. Sandra, what exactly do you think they recorded? She swallowed hard, her throat tight and burning. She pressed a hand against her chest, trying to steady the trembling inside her. Keanu, I told you after you left that night I broke down. I said things I didn't understand. I was upset, scared, confused, and I said things out loud that weren't meant for anyone, things that someone could twist. He nodded slowly, trying to piece it together. Things about safety, things about truth. Yes, she whispered, her voice cracking. And if someone recorded my voice saying those words, they could make it seem like something it was. They could make it seem like I was talking about something between us. They could make it seem like I was hiding some love confession or scandal or something I'm not ready for the world to think. Keanu considered this carefully, his jaw tightening with quiet anger, not at her, but at the person who dared to weaponize her vulnerability. If they used your words and mine out of context, they're doing it to manipulate emotions, not to tell the truth. Sandra nodded, her eyes filling with tears. And now people will believe whatever fits the best story, even if it's wrong. Before Keanu could answer, the assistant's voice erupted again through the speaker, breathless and panicked. It's out. Oh God, it's everywhere. The full audio is out. Sandra felt a wave of nausea hit her. Her legs buckled, and she reached for the table to steady herself as Keanu moved behind her instinctively, ready to catch her if she needed. What does it say? Keanu demanded, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. The assistant hesitated. I don't know how to explain it without you hearing it. You need to listen. He sent a link. Keanu looked at Sandra. Do you want to hear it? Her breath trembled. We have to, before the world decides what it means. He nodded gently, then we listened together. They sat close on the couch, their shoulders almost touching, the phone between them like a fragile window into the past. Sandra braced herself as Keanu pressed play. The audio crackled. A faint wind. A distant hum from lighting equipment behind the old sound stage. And then, Keanu's voice. Younger, softer, filled with gentle compassion. I care about you more than I should. Sandra inhaled sharply, her chest tightening painfully. Hearing it again, hearing it outside the safety of that moment, felt like someone had reached into her heart and pulled something sacred into the open. But then, before she could react, another voice. Her voice, raw, broken, and clearly afraid. I wish I could feel safe like this all the time. I wish I could tell him the truth. Keanu's breath caught. Sandra's tears fell instantly. Hearing her younger self like that, shaking, hurting, longing for clarity, felt like reliving a pain she thought she had healed from. The vulnerability in her voice was unmistakable, but so was the desperation. She sounded like someone who had lost control of her world and was begging for a moment of peace. The audio continued. A faint rustling. A second voice, one neither of them recognized, whispering something in the background. Something cold. Something manipulative. I told you he cares too much, and if people knew what he said, both of you would be finished. Sandra gasped. Keanu's eyes widened. The voice was proof that someone else was there that night watching, listening, manipulating, not imagining, not interpreting, not guessing, but actively twisting. Sandra covered her mouth, trembling. Oh my God, I wasn't crazy. Someone was there. They did manipulate me. They twisted your kindness into something dangerous. The recording went on. Sandra cried softly in the background. Keanu's quiet voice tried to comfort her. And the mysterious voice whispered more lies. You shouldn't trust him. He will leave. They all leave. Sandra shook her head violently as she listened. That's not true. That was never true. I didn't even recognize their voice back then. I thought it was someone else. I thought maybe it was my own fear. I didn't know someone was really there. Keanu placed a gentle hand over hers, steadying her shaking fingers. This isn't your fault. They preyed on your emotions. They targeted you when you were vulnerable. That's on them. But the recording wasn't finished. The last part was the most devastating. Her younger voice, small, broken, whispering. I care about him too, more than I can explain. The phone fell silent. Sandra felt like the world stopped breathing. Keanu stared at her slowly, deeply, as if trying to process the meaning behind words she never expected him to hear. His expression wasn't one of shock or judgment or confusion. It was something else entirely, soft, pained, and full of understanding. Sandra's hands flew to her face as she sobbed, unable to hold the pain back anymore. That's not what it sounds like, she cried. I wasn't talking about romantic feelings or some confession or anything like that. I was terrified. I cared about you because you were safe, because you were gentle, because you were the only person who was kind to me when I was falling apart. Keanu pulled her into a gentle embrace, not forcefully, not dramatically, but with the kind of quiet care that felt like wind healing a wound instead of touching it. Sandra, he whispered, I know exactly what you meant. She cried into his chest, her shoulders shaking, her body letting go of years she carried alone. The assistant spoke again, but softer this time. The comments online, they're mixed. Some people believe the worst. Some people think it's taken out of context, but the clip is everywhere. Sandra wiped her tears with trembling hands. What do we do, Keanu? How do we fight something like this? How do you fight a lie that uses pieces of truth? Keanu pulled back slightly, looking directly into her eyes. We tell the real story, not to defend ourselves, not to argue, but because truth deserves to live outside fear. Sandra's breath hitched. But what if people twist it? What if they don't believe us? He shook his head gently. Sandra, people who want drama won't believe the truth anyway. But the people who matter, the people who still see goodness when the world gets loud, they will understand. Sandra sat quietly, absorbing his words. Finally, she whispered, You really believe that? I do, he said softly. And besides, we don't owe the world perfection. We only owe them honesty. There was a pause. A long, deep, meaningful pause. Then Sandra spoke again, fragile but brave. Keanu, I want to face this with you. I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want fear to control my life the way it used to. Keanu smiled gently, a small, humble smile that carried years of quiet strength. Then we face it together. And so they did. Within the next hour, Sandra and Keanu sat side by side, recording a heartfelt video. No staged lighting, no dramatic music, just two people telling the truth with clarity, respect, and vulnerability. Sandra shared the pain of her younger self, her struggles with fear, her journey toward emotional healing. Keanu explained the context of his words, the kindness behind them, the friendship they built. They didn't attack the person who leaked the audio. They didn't blame. They didn't accuse. They simply told the truth. And something surprising happened. The world listened. Millions of people watched. And instead of scandal or hatred, most responded with empathy. People related to Sandra's vulnerability. People admired Keanu's calm compassion. People saw the humanity in the moment. The manipulative voice in the recording exposed the real villain, not Sandra or Keanu, but the person who weaponized their pain. The anonymous account disappeared overnight. The story shifted. People began defending them. And for the first time in a long time, Sandra felt free. Later that night, when the world quieted and the noise faded, they sat on his couch again, not as actors, not as people fighting a rumor, but as two human beings who had finally faced a shadow they didn't know they were still carrying. "Thank you," Sandra said softly, looking at him with a tender gratitude she couldn't hide. "For staying, for believing me, for helping me heal." Keanu shook his head with gentle humility. "You did the hardest part, I just stood beside you." She smiled, warmth softening her features. "Then maybe that's what I needed all along, someone who stayed." Keanu's eyes softened. "And I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, truly seeing him, his steady kindness, his quiet strength, the way he held her truth without judgment. And for the first time in years, she felt something peaceful settle deep within her chest. She was safe. She was understood. She was no longer walking alone. And the world finally saw the truth. Not a scandal, not a secret, but a story of healing, friendship, and the quiet power of honesty.